They cut me out of the family for 13 years. Then, the moment I finally had something worth taking, they came back with a moving truck. How does a sister erase you for over a decade and still believe she owns a key to your front door? My name is Jasmine. I build luxury skincare for women who are tired of surviving. And tonight, I'm going to tell you how the people who taught me to disappear tried to move into the life I built without them. For the last 3 years, my world has smelled like eucalyptus, cold rain, and money that doesn't make noise. I live in a glass house perched on a cliff above the Puget Sound in Seattle. When the fog rolls in, the water and the sky blur together until it feels like the entire planet has agreed to leave me alone. The architect called it minimalist. The magazines called it stark. My therapist once called it defensive. I call it earned. Every wall is reinforced steel beneath the glass. Every gate runs on sensors. Deliveries stop at the lower drive unless they are cleared. Privacy here isn't a luxury. It's infrastructure. It is the physical manifestation of a promise I made to myself at 22 years old. No one gets to take from me again. My company, Aura, now clears a little over $3 million a year. We formulate botanical oils and cleansers, package Serenity in frosted bottles, and ship it to people who want to wash the day off their skin. Investors love the margins. Influencers love the glow. What they are really buying is the fantasy of being untouchable. I would know. I invented it. Most days, I speak to my staff through scheduled calls and carefully structured emails. My signature authorizes payroll. My voice approves launches. But no one here knows me in the way people from my old life did. No one knows how small I used to make myself. No one remembers the girl who apologized when someone else bumped into her. Up here, I am a rumor with excellent credit. That afternoon, the rain was relentless, drumming against the windows in steady silver lines. I stood at my kitchen island, a slab of black marble that cost more than my first car counting drops of sandalwood into a glass beaker. Precision calms me. Chemistry obeys. Ratios make sense in ways people never did. Outside, the pines bent in the wind. The water below was the color of slate. It was the kind of day that erases edges, softens memory, convinces you the past might finally stay buried. I remember thinking, I am safe. It's strange how confidently we lie to ourselves right before something breaks. The chime from the security gate cut through the house sharp, electronic, wrong. I paused mid-pour. I wasn't expecting anyone. My drivers had already come and gone. No meetings, no deliveries, no emergencies that couldn't wait until morning. For a moment, I just listened to the echo fade. Maybe they hit the call box by mistake, I thought. Maybe someone turned around. But the sensor chimed again, longer this time, impatient. I set the beaker down and wiped my hands on a linen towel, already irritated at the intrusion of randomness into my carefully controlled evening. The security tablet glowed on the wall near the pantry. One tap and the driveway camera flickered to life. I saw the curve of asphalt cutting through the trees, the wet shine of rain. The massive iron gate sliding open because the system had already identified the vehicle as authorized for approach. Then I saw the truck. Orange and white, boxy, loud even in silence. A U-Haul. It crawled up my pristine driveway like an infection moving through clean tissue. My body reacted before my mind could argue. My heart didn't start racing. It stopped. A coldness spread outward from my chest, precise and surgical, like someone replacing blood with ice water. I knew. There are certain energies you never forget. Certain silhouettes that survive time, therapy, distance, success. Trauma brands them into you like coordinates. The truck lurched to a halt in front of my custom steel doors. The engine rattled, coughed, died. The driver's side opened. Even through the grainy resolution and falling rain, I recognized the way she moved, the impatience, the assumption of welcome, the tiny preening gesture as she smoothed her hair. Paige, my little sister, 32 now, but still wearing adulthood like a costume she expected someone else to pay for. The passenger door opened more slowly. My mother stepped down with careful dignity, as if the driveway were a red carpet instead of private property. Her posture was the same as it had always been, upright, appraising, already disappointed. She looked at my house not with wonder, but evaluation, as if she were deciding whether it was worthy of her. They stood there together in the Seattle drizzle, framed by glass and pine and 13 years of silence. They didn't look like family. They looked like creditors from a life I had defaulted on. I felt something then that surprised me. Not fear, not rage. Clarity. No one brings a 20-foot moving truck for reconciliation. No one packs luggage for forgiveness. You arrive with boxes when you expect to stay. They hadn't come to visit. They had come to install themselves. My finger hovered over the intercom button. Beneath me, the house hummed with quiet power. The systems, the locks, the layers between their chaos and my peace. For 13 years, I had believed distance was protection, that silence was a wall. But as I watched my mother adjust her coat and Paige check her reflection in the camera lens, I realized something terrible and illuminating at the same time. Silence isn't a wall, it's a debt. And they had come to collect. If you want to understand what I did next, why I didn't open the gate, why I didn't run, why I smiled, instead, you have to understand what it costs to build a lock strong enough to hold. Let me take you back to the night I learned how expensive family can be. If you want to understand why a woman can look at her own mother standing in the rain and refuse to open the gate, you have to go back to the moment she learned what her place in the family really was. I was 22 years old, still living at home, still trying to be good. Back then my life was small in a way that felt temporary. I had plans folded neatly in the drawer of my mind, graduate school applications, apartments I bookmarked but never visited, futures I thought I could earn if I just kept being patient and useful and easy to love. I believed endurance was a virtue. The letter was waiting for me on my bed when I came home from work. White envelope, windowed. Official in a way that made my stomach tighten before I even opened it. I remember sitting down, still wearing my shoes, the late afternoon light slanting across the carpet like something holy and accusing. Collections notice, $15,000. A credit card opened in my name, maxed. For a moment, my brain simply refused the information. It rearranged the numbers, searched for typos, looked for mercy in fine print. I checked the name again. Mine. I walked to the kitchen because disaster always moves toward witnesses. Somewhere inside me, I still believed there had been a mistake that an adult would fix. Paige was at the counter eating yogurt, legs swinging, phone balanced in her hand. She didn't look up right away. She was 19, pretty in the careless way people are when they have never had to pay for anything they break. Paige, I said, and my voice already sounded wrong to me. Too thin, too formal. Did you open a credit card in my name? She glanced at the letter. No panic, no confusion, no performance of innocence. She shrugged. It was the shrug that did it. Not the theft, not the amount, the shrug. Relax, she said. I needed it. I was going to tell you. For what? I wanted to ask. Permission after the fact? Gratitude? She kept talking, spoon scraping the plastic container. She deserved a trip. Everyone else got to live. I was always so dramatic about money. She would pay it back eventually. Why was I making that face? As if my future were a library card she had borrowed and misplaced. I remember gripping the paper so hard it crumpled. I remember thinking that if she would just look sorry, I could survive it. If she would just acknowledge that I existed in the equation. Then my mother walked in. I can still replay the choreography of that moment with terrifying clarity. The way Paige straightened slightly, not afraid, just ready. The way I felt relief bloom in my chest like oxygen finally arriving. An authority had entered the room. A parent. I handed her the letter. My hands were shaking hard enough that the pages made a soft, dry whisper. I waited. I waited for outrage. For correction. For the simple miracle of someone choosing me. My mother read it. She sighed, the sound already exhausted by inconvenience. Her eyes moved from the balance to Paige and then, finally, to me. I watched her calculate. Not morality. Not fairness. Damage control? We can't have police involved, she said. I blinked. I thought I had misheard. Paige has her whole life ahead of her. Do you want to ruin that over money? Over money. as if $15,000 were loose change in a couch I had personally misplaced. She used my name, I whispered. And you're her sister, my mother replied. Like that solved it. Families take care of each other. You're the responsible one. Fix it. Fix it. The title I had been training for my entire life. I wish I could tell you, I argued. I wish I could tell you I threw the letter back at them and walked out with cinematic dignity. But if you've never been raised inside an invisible system where love is conditional on your usefulness, you don't understand how heavy disobedience feels. Saying no didn't feel like power. It felt like exile, like death, like becoming the villain in a story everyone else had already agreed to tell about you. So I did what I had been built to do. I absorbed the impact. I remember nodding. I remember apologizing, unbelievably, for making things difficult. Paige went back to her phone. My mother started talking about payment plans, about how proud she was that I was mature enough to handle it. Mature. I went to my room and closed the door and sat on the floor with my back against the bed. I stared at the wall until it blurred, until the future I had been arranging for myself dissolved like sugar in water. Graduate school, gone. Savings gone. Trust gone. But beneath the grief, something else moved. Not loud. Not heroic. A fracture, quiet as a branch breaking under snow. I paid the debt. Every dollar. I worked extra shifts. I emptied accounts I had sworn I would protect. Each payment felt like carving pieces off myself and mailing them away. No one thanked me. Why would they? Oxygen doesn't get thanked for being breathable. The night the final confirmation cleared, I sat on my bed in the dark and understood something with terrifying calm. If I stayed, this would be my life, forever. There would always be another emergency, another sacrifice, another moment where love required my disappearance. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I packed 2 bags, jeans, documents, the few objects that felt like evidence I had existed before them. I walked past Paige's closed door, past the living room where my mother slept in front of the television, the blue light flickering across her face like absolution. I stood there for a long time, hoping some instinct would call me back. Nothing did. I left the key on the counter, and then I walked out into the night, owing them nothing except the silence they would later accuse me of. I thought freedom would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt like grief with better weather. But as I drove away, one truth settled into me, solid and irreversible. They had asked me to pay to remain part of the family, so I did. And then I canceled the membership. When I left that house, I didn't run toward a dream. I ran toward distance. There's a difference. Dreams are bright, magnetic, full of promise. Distance is colder. Distance is about subtraction. It's about how far you can get before the echo of someone else's expectations can no longer find you. I drove until the city thinned and the streets grew unfamiliar, until my phone battery died and the silence inside the car became something I could finally breathe. By the time the sun began to rise, I had crossed an invisible border between the person my family required me to be and someone I had never been allowed to meet. I ended up in Tacoma because it was cheap and anonymous and didn't ask questions. The apartment I rented was half underground, a converted basement unit with narrow windows that stared at the ankles of pedestrians passing by. It smelled like damp carpet and old paint, like other people's temporary solutions. The heater clanged at night. The pipes spoke in small metallic coughs. Sometimes I could hear my upstairs neighbor arguing with her boyfriend in exhausted circles that sounded painfully familiar. It was not glamorous. It was freedom. I got a job almost immediately, then another, then pieced together freelance lab work wherever I could find it. I slept in fragments. I ate standing up. I learned the geography of exhaustion so intimately that it became a roommate instead of an enemy. But in the quiet spaces between obligation and collapse, something began to grow. Anger would have burned me alive if I had let it. So I translated it into study, into formulation, into control. If I couldn't clean the past, I could clean something. I started with soap. Lye, fat, ratios, temperatures, the brutal, obedient clarity of chemistry. Unlike people, molecules behaved according to rules. They did not gaslight you. They did not reinterpret history. If you followed the process, they transformed. I became obsessed with transformation. At night, while the city slept, I mixed oils at the tiny kitchenette counter, my notebooks spreading across the table like maps to a country I was inventing. Lavender for calm, eucalyptus for breath, sandalwood for grounding. I read everything I could afford, watched lectures, ruined batches, burned my hands, started again. Pain, it turned out, was an incredible teacher if you stopped asking it to love you. I didn't date. I didn't socialize. People invited me out sometimes, coworkers who mistook my focus for mystery, but I was terrified of anything that might dilute the fragile architecture I was building. Connection felt like a door someone could walk through and rearrange my life, so I kept the door closed. I worked 18-hour days not because I was ambitious, but because forward motion was the only way I knew to prevent the past from catching up. Months blurred, then years. Farmers markets came first. Folding table, handmade labels, awkward conversations with strangers who asked how I got started. I learned how to smile without revealing anything. I learned how to sell not just product, but relief. Women would pick up a bottle, inhale, and their shoulders would drop half an inch. I recognized that drop. It was the beginning of safety. I built a language around it, around restoration, around ritual, around the idea that cleansing was not vanity, but survival. The brand grew slowly, then all at once, the way certain storms gather without announcing themselves. Boutiques called, distributors called, investors called. Every time a new contract came through, I waited for someone to appear and tell me there had been a mistake, that I had misunderstood my role in the universe. No one did. Aura expanded from my kitchen to a shared lab, from the shared lab to a facility with employees who wore gloves and hairnets, and looked at me with respect that made me deeply uncomfortable. Respect implied permanence. I still half expected eviction from my own success. But the numbers kept insisting. Last year, we cleared just over $3 million in net revenue. $3 million. Sometimes I say it out loud just to hear how impossible it sounds in my mouth. The girl who once apologized for existing had built something that occupied space in the world without asking permission. I began to understand what I had really been manufacturing all those nights in the basement. Not soap. Distance. Every sale moved me further from the version of my life where my value depended on what I could surrender. Every shipment was a mile marker. Every customer a witness that I could give without being consumed. My hands changed. They became steady, capable, scarred in small, private ways that felt like proof of citizenship in the country of survival. And one evening, standing in a warehouse office long after everyone else had gone home, I opened an old spreadsheet out of curiosity. I looked at the total revenue, the margins, the growth curves rising like mountains. Then I thought about $15,000, the number that had once destroyed me. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it, soft and disbelieving. It hit me with the clarity of a solved equation. That money hadn't been theft. It had been tuition. A severance package from a job I had been performing since childhood. Emotional janitor, financial shock absorber, professional apologizer. I had paid the fee, and in return, I had been released. Standing there in the fluorescent quiet, I made myself a promise that would follow me all the way to the house on the cliff, all the way to the steel gates and the glass walls and the woman I would become. No refunds, no returns, no re-entry. They had taken what they believed they were owed. What they never understood was that the payment bought my exit, and I was never, ever going back. The strange thing about seeing people from your old life after you've rebuilt yourself is this: they still expect the same doors to open. Time passes for you. You evolve, fracture, fortify. You learn new languages, new rules, new definitions of love. But for them, you remain frozen at the last moment they felt powerful over you. Standing in my kitchen, watching the live feed from the driveway, I could see it in the way they held themselves. Expectation, not hope, not humility. Expectation. Rain slid down the camera lens in silver streaks, blurring the edges of their figures, but not enough to hide the choreography I knew by heart. Paige shifted her weight, already irritated by inconvenience. My mother scanned the property the way she used to inspect hotel rooms, searching for flaws she could use as leverage. Neither of them looked uncertain. Why would they be? In their minds, they had simply arrived to resume ownership. Paige pulled the hood of her jacket back, shook out her hair, and glanced toward the front doors, waiting for them to open automatically, as if wealth came with obedience programmed into the walls. Even through the tiny speaker, I could almost hear her internal monologue. Finally, took you long enough. My mother stepped forward, closer to the intercom camera. Her posture softened, not into kindness, but into presentation. She had always been brilliant at costume changes. Authority when she needed control, martyrdom when she needed sympathy, benevolence when she needed compliance. Jasmine, she called, voice lifted toward the house, already threaded with patient disappointment. We're ready to put the past behind us. I stared at the screen. Behind us. As if trauma were furniture you could drag into another room and pretend you had redecorated. Then she delivered the line that would have worked on the old version of me like a master key. We forgive you. For a second, something dangerously close to laughter rose in my throat. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief breaking the surface. They were standing uninvited in my driveway after 13 years of silence, and they had arrived with absolution. I zoomed the camera in. Details tell the truth people try to bury. My mother's Chanel jacket was real, but tired. The cuffs slightly frayed, the color dulled by seasons it had survived longer than her pride. The Louis Vuitton bag that used to function as armor carried a scar along one corner that no boutique had repaired. Paige's sneakers, aggressively branded, were creased and damp, their shine defeated by travel. They were dressed like power. They did not possess it. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't a reunion. It was a strategy. For most of my childhood, my mother had ruled by narrative. She decided who was good, who was difficult, who deserved comfort, and who deserved correction. Approval flowed from her like currency, and we competed for it like oxygen. But narrative without resources is theater. They were performing wealth, performing authority, performing forgiveness. Because if they could make me believe the roles were unchanged, then maybe I would step back into mine. The fixer, the provider, the door that opens. I felt the old reflex twitch in my chest, the urge to rush, to explain, to make everything smooth again. Survival training doesn't evaporate just because you buy better locks. But alongside it, something else stood up. The woman I had built in the years since. She did not rush. She observed. My finger hovered over the intercom button mounted beside the tablet. The house was warm behind me, lit in soft amber tones, smelling faintly of cedar and sandalwood. Every system hummed in quiet loyalty. I had paid for this peace with time, labor, and the irreversible act of leaving. I wasn't going to donate it back. I pressed the button. My voice traveled down the driveway, amplified, disembodied, stripped of the softness they remembered. State your business. They both startled, just slightly, not because they were afraid, but because they had expected immediacy, not protocol. Paige leaned toward the camera. Jasmine, stop being weird, she said, already annoyed. Open the gate. It's pouring. I watched her blink rain from her lashes, irritated that the weather had not been instructed to cooperate with her entrance. Why are you here? I asked. My mother moved her aside with a small, practiced gesture, reclaiming center stage. We came to fix this family, she said. Enough time has passed. We're ready to move forward. Move forward. The phrase hung between us like a threat disguised as mercy. Paige folded her arms. Mom told you. We're moving in. We'll figure everything else out later. Of course they would. Later had always belonged to me. I felt something settle into place inside my spine, vertebra by vertebra, like architecture locking. No, I said. The word was quiet. It did not echo, it did not tremble, but the silence that followed it expanded, vast and seismic. Paige laughed, short and incredulous. What do you mean, no? I replied. You are not coming into my home. The temperature on the screen seemed to change. My mother's expression sharpened, the benevolent mask dissolving as if heat had finally reached it. "Excuse me?" she said, voice dropping into the register I had feared as a child. "I am your mother. I am standing in the rain. You will open this gate." The command hit me, and I waited for my body to revert, to shrink, to obey out of muscle memory. It didn't. I surprised both of us. "I'm not a child," I said, "and this is not your house." Paige stepped closer, anger blooming now that charm had failed. "You think you're better than us because you made money?" I considered the question. Better. No. Stronger boundaries. Yes. "I think," I said carefully, "that you mistook my absence for permission." Wind moved through the trees. Rain tapped steadily on the hood of the truck. My mother opened her mouth, ready with another script, another emotional lever. I ended the connection. The speaker went dead. The camera remained, and I watched them stand there, stunned, as the reality they had refused to update finally loaded. They had arrived expecting the past, but the past didn't live here anymore. For a few seconds after I cut the intercom, they just stood there. People who have spent their lives believing doors will open for them don't immediately understand what a closed one means. They wait for the correction, for the laugh, for the moment the universe apologizes and rearranges itself into something familiar. I watched that expectation flicker across Paige's face like a buffering icon. Then I saw the shift. I knew it before she even reached into her pocket. Rejection, to Paige, was never information. It was strategy. If one audience stopped responding, she simply found another. Her hand came out with her phone. I saw the small, circular attachment snap into place on the back, the portable ring light she carried the way other people carried dignity. The movement was smooth, practiced, terrifyingly efficient. Rain or no rain, humiliation or no humiliation, she knew exactly how to convert discomfort into content. I actually whispered, "Don't," to the empty kitchen, as if she could hear me, as if she would ever stop. She wiped her cheeks, pushed her hair forward, tilted the camera so that my house rose behind her, massive and distant, all glass and shadow. She made sure she and my mother were framed in the foreground, smaller, vulnerable, soaked. Then her face transformed. It was extraordinary to watch. The irritation dissolved. The entitlement softened. Her mouth trembled just enough. Her eyes filled, but did not overflow. Years of emotional manipulation condensed into an expression designed for maximum harvest. She went live. I didn't need audio. I knew the script by heart because I had lived inside it. We came in peace. We just want to talk. She abandoned us. Now she won't even open the gate. Behind her, my mother lowered her head at precisely the right angle, clutching her bag like a relic, embodying wounded motherhood for strangers who would never ask follow-up questions. It would have been impressive if it weren't so predictable. I turned away from the security monitor and looked at my own phone resting on the marble island. It began with one vibration, then another, then many, layered on top of each other until the device hummed angrily against the stone like something alive and furious. I walked toward it slowly, already aware of what I would find. My body remembered this rhythm, the summons of collective judgment, the gravitational pull of other people's opinions. Messages cascaded down the screen. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. An aunt who once told me I was too sensitive. Numbers I didn't recognize, armed with moral clarity and zero context. How could you do this to your mother? Their family. Money really changed you. You should be ashamed. Shame. Their favorite currency. For most of my life, shame had been the leash. A single suggestion of it and I would heal automatically, desperate to repair whatever version of myself they had declared defective. I stood there, the phone buzzing in my hand, and for a terrifying, fragile moment, I felt the old architecture trying to rebuild itself inside me. "Open the gate," it whispered. "Make it stop. Trade your peace for their approval. It's cheaper." My chest tightened. My pulse fluttered. I could see, with nauseating clarity, the alternate ending where I walked down the driveway, apologizing, ushering them inside, putting towels around their shoulders while they reinstalled themselves into my life like mold returning to a damp wall. I had done it before, not here. But in every smaller way that had led me there, I looked back at the screen. Paige was crying now, really committing to it. Her voice, though I still couldn't hear it, looked tremulous, righteous, convincing. Comments were probably exploding with sympathy, outrage, certainty. People love a villain they can see. A big silent house is perfect for that. What they didn't see were the nights in the basement apartment, the extra shifts, the credit score I rebuilt molecule by molecule, the years of absence that had been less abandonment and more evacuation. They didn't see the cost. They saw the gate. And gates, to the uninvited, always look cruel. Another wave of vibrations shuddered through my hand. My name trended in group chats I had escaped years ago. The family narrative was rebooting in real time, and once again I had been cast in the role of difficult daughter, ungrateful sister, woman who thinks success absolves her of duty. I waited for it to break me. It didn't. Instead, I noticed something almost clinical. Their words weren't heavy anymore. They were loud, yes, persistent, annoying, but weightless. Noise hitting reinforced glass. I had spent 13 years becoming someone who could survive being misunderstood. 13 years learning that other people's interpretations of me were not emergencies requiring immediate response. The girl who left home would have opened the gate to stop the buzzing. The woman in the kitchen adjusted her grip on the phone and pressed a single button on the side. Do not disturb. The screen went black. The vibrations stopped. Just like that. Silence returned to the room, thick and absolute, settling over the marble, the cabinets, my breathing. Outside, Paige continued performing grief for an invisible jury. Inside, I removed myself from the trial. I walked back to the monitor. They were still there, still broadcasting, still certain that public shame was a crowbar capable of prying open any door. What they didn't understand, what they had never updated in their internal software, was that shame requires cooperation. You have to agree to feel it. And I was done agreeing. Let them scream into the rain. Let them harvest sympathy from strangers. Let them build a story where I was cold and they were wronged. The internet could not open my gate. Only I could do that. And for the first time in my life, access to me was not negotiable. I folded my arms, calm, settling deeper into my bones, and felt something almost unfamiliar bloom beneath it. Not anger. Authority. If they wanted escalation, I could provide it, but not emotionally, professionally. I glanced toward the secure landline mounted near the study, the number only 3 people possessed, the line that connected me to solutions instead of arguments. They thought they had started a siege. What they didn't realize was that I owned the map. There is a moment in every conflict when you realize you can keep arguing about feelings, or you can start moving assets. Standing in my quiet kitchen while my sister performed heartbreak to the internet, I understood with absolute clarity that emotion was the battlefield they knew how to win. Tears, guilt, obligation, blood ties, those were their native currencies. They had decades of experience manipulating them. If I stepped onto that terrain, I would lose, not because I was wrong, but because I had once been trained to surrender. So I chose a different terrain. I chose paper, ownership, leverage. I crossed the room to the study where the secure landline sat waiting in its cradle, sleek and unlisted. Only 3 people in the world had this number. It did not ring with drama. It rang with consequence. I picked it up and dialed. David answered before the second ring completed. Jasmine, he said, already alert. We're seeing unusual activity on the exterior feeds. Do you want law enforcement? I turned toward the hallway where, beyond walls of steel and glass, Paige was still narrating her tragedy to strangers. My mother remained positioned just behind her, head bowed, a portrait of exhausted dignity. Law enforcement. It would have been simple, clean, immediate. It also would have made me reactive. And I was done reacting. Not yet, I said. I need you to open the file labeled Project Amnesia. The acquisition from 3 months ago. There was the faint sound of keys, screens, recognition. David inhaled softly. "The foreclosure bundle," he confirmed. "You want a trigger notification?" "Yes." He hesitated, not because he doubted me, but because he understood scale. "Once we send it, there's no ambiguity left." "That's the point," I replied. Outside, Paige spun slowly, making sure my house filled the background of her broadcast, the villain's castle refusing entry to the weeping peasants. She believed she was applying pressure. She had no idea she was standing inside it. "Send it," I said. I hung up. Here is what my family never understood about me. They thought my silence meant passivity. They thought distance meant avoidance. They thought if they ever truly needed me, they could arrive like royalty, and I would resume my assigned position at their feet. They mistook my absence for emptiness. But absence can be preparation. 3 months earlier, my holding company, one of several, deliberately dull in name and buried under professional management, had purchased a portfolio of distressed mortgages in the region. It was a standard strategy, boring, profitable, the kind of thing that happens every day without drama. I had reviewed the list myself late one night, more out of habit than necessity. Then I saw the address. My childhood home, the place where every rule about love had been written in disappearing ink. My mother had missed 8 payments. Late notices had piled up. The bank was days from auction. Within weeks, strangers would have been walking through those rooms, evaluating paint colors, discussing resale value, ignorant of the ghosts. I could have let that happen. Part of me had wanted to let the universe deliver its own verdict, let consequences arrive wearing someone else's face. But I knew my family. Eviction would not teach them humility. It would redirect them toward me. Desperate people always travel toward the last memory of rescue. So I bought the note. $240,000, wired with the emotional neutrality of a person purchasing time, not redemption. I did not save them. I repositioned them. If anyone was going to determine when the crisis erupted, it would be me. And now they had driven it straight into my driveway. My phone, silenced on the counter, remained dark. Outside, Paige continued to cry to an audience that could offer sympathy but not solutions. My mother paced, glancing occasionally toward the gate, still convinced that maternal gravity would eventually pull it open. Then it happened. My mother's purse vibrated. Even from the distant camera angle, I saw her freeze. She reached inside, frowning, annoyed at interruption, expecting perhaps another relative reporting outrage on her behalf. Paige's phone chimed a second later. The timing was surgical. They looked down almost in unison. I leaned closer to the screen. Confusion moved first, brows tightening, lips parting. The small recalibration of expectation when reality fails to match narrative. My mother tapped the message, trying to enlarge it against the rain. Paige leaned in, her live stream forgotten, followers abruptly irrelevant. I watched comprehension land. It did not arrive gently. It struck. My mother's posture changed as if gravity had increased. Paige grabbed her arm, reading faster now, her mouth forming the words silently. Transfer of deed. Creditor, reassignment. Jasmine Reed Holdings, LLC. I saw my mother say it. She owns it, not the house. The debt, which is so much more important. I pressed the intercom again. This time, when my voice traveled down the driveway, it carried no defensiveness at all. Only information. "Did you receive the email?" I asked. They looked up at the camera. Everything theatrical had drained away. No martyr, no influencer. Just 2 women standing in the rain, abruptly aware they had misidentified the power structure. "You bought it," my mother said, and I heard something in her tone I had never heard directed at me before. Uncertainty. "I bought the mortgage," I corrected. "I own the arrears, the interest. And as of this morning, I own the eviction order filed when the property was vacated." Paige shook her head, as if physical motion could dislodge legality. "You can't do that." I almost smiled. I already had. They thought they had come to negotiate reconciliation. They had arrived at a bank. And the bank, after years of waiting, had finally decided to speak. There is a particular sound people make when they realize power has changed hands. It isn't loud. It's the absence of certainty. Standing in the rain at the end of my driveway, my mother and sister looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Memory is rarely honest about scale, but structurally. Like buildings after the foundation has shifted, still upright but no longer trustworthy. For the first time since they arrived, neither of them seemed to know which line came next. Paige spoke anyway, because silence had never been her talent. "Jasmine," she said, and now her voice carried something raw, stripped of performance. "We have nowhere to go." The sentence floated up toward the house and pressed itself against the glass. Nowhere. I believed her. I had seen the records. 8 months unpaid. Final notices. Locks changed yesterday morning. They had packed what they could fit in the truck because there had been nothing else to do. A younger version of me would have folded instantly at that word. Nowhere would have translated into responsibility, into emergency, into fix it or you are cruel. I leaned my hip against the kitchen counter and let myself feel the pull of it. Compassion is not weakness. It is information. It tells you someone is hurting, but it does not tell you to light yourself on fire to warm them. "I know," I said. The honesty of it startled them. My mother stepped closer to the speaker. Rain had flattened her hair. Her makeup had begun to surrender. Without the armor of presentation, she looked older, suddenly reachable in a way she never had when I was a child. "Then let us in," she said. "We're your family." Family. A word that had been used my entire life as both invitation and weapon. I closed my eyes briefly, just long enough to acknowledge the ache that still lived in me, the reflex that wanted stupidly, beautifully, to belong to something uncomplicated. But belonging had always come with an invoice, and I had paid enough. "I am not going to open the gate," I said, gently, clearly. "You are not coming into my house. You are not sleeping in my guest room. That is not an option." Paige made a sound of disbelief, anger flaring again, because it was easier than fear. "So what? You're just going to leave us out here? After everything?" After everything. It's fascinating how often that phrase is used by the people who did the taking. "I'm not leaving you on the street," I said. I reached for the tablet on the counter and opened the second file David had prepared. My finger hovered for a moment, not because I doubted the decision, but because I understood its symbolism. This was the last transfer. I pressed send. Their phones chimed almost immediately. They both looked down. "What is this?" Paige asked, confusion knitting her face. "It's a lease," I said. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Clean, safe, and paid for 6 months. Utilities included for now. There's a grocery store within walking distance and public transportation into the city. My mother blinked at the screen as if the words might rearrange into something else. "Breton?" she said, horror creeping in. "That's across the water." "It's 3 towns over," I replied, "and it has a roof." The rain continued to fall between us, steady, impartial. I imagined the apartment. I had toured it myself under another name. Neutral carpet, functional kitchen, nothing glamorous, nothing shameful, a place to begin again if beginning again was something you were willing to attempt. Paige looked up, her bravado draining in visible increments. "You expect us to just go there?" "Yes," I said. "And then what?" she demanded. "Then you build a life," I answered. "You find work. You save money. You learn how to exist without assuming someone else will absorb the consequences." My mother's mouth trembled. "There are conditions," she guessed. Of course there were. Love without boundaries had nearly destroyed me. I would not offer it to anyone else. "Yes," I said. "The lease is in my company's name. If you contact me directly, it ends. If you speak about me publicly, it ends. If you come back to this property, it ends. 6 months. After that, the responsibility is yours." Paige stared at me as if I had started speaking another language. Maybe I had. It was the language of adulthood, of contracts instead of guilt. "Why would you even do this?" she asked finally, her voice smaller now, almost childlike. "After everything you think we did to you?" I considered the question carefully. Why help at all? Why not let the rain finish what justice had started? Because cruelty replicates. Because I had seen what happened when power was used without mercy. Because becoming them would be the only true failure. Because I'm not you, I said. The words landed softly, but they did not move. They stayed exactly where they belonged. I watched my mother absorb that. Watched decades of hierarchy rearrange themselves behind her eyes. For 35 years, she had been the authority, the evaluator, the one who decided who deserved relief. Now she was the one asking for it. Please, she whispered. The sound passed through me like wind through a broken house. It touched everything. It threatened to stay. But compassion does not require surrender. The keys are in a lockbox at the apartment, I continued. The code is the date you opened that credit card in my name, Paige. I figured you'd remember it. She flinched. Memory, it turns out, is also a form of accounting. For a long moment, none of us moved. Rain filled the space where our old roles used to be. The truck idled, heavy with everything they had managed to salvage. Finally, my mother nodded. Not agreement. Recognition. She turned first, shoulders bent beneath a weight that no designer label could disguise. Paige lingered a second longer, looking up at the house, perhaps searching for the sister she thought she could still summon. She didn't find her. That girl had left years ago with 2 bags and a broken understanding of love. The woman at the intercom had built something else, and she was not giving it back. I expected shouting when they finally turned toward the truck. Accusations thrown at the glass, last-minute threats, a dramatic promise that I would regret this, that karma had my address memorized, that blood would always find a way back to me. That was the language of my childhood. But none of it came. My mother walked first, each step careful on the wet gravel, her bag clutched tightly against her side as if it still contained authority, as if there were something inside it capable of reversing what had just happened. Paige followed more slowly. She glanced once toward the camera, instinct tugging at her to deliver a closing statement to an audience that had already begun to scroll away. There was nothing left to perform. They climbed into the cab, doors shut. For a moment, the truck remained still, engine quiet. Like a held breath, the world was waiting to release. Then it roared to life. Headlights cut across the trees, reverse lights flared pale against the rain. The huge vehicle began its awkward retreat down the long curve of my driveway, tires sliding slightly in the mud they had brought with them. I watched until the orange rectangle disappeared beyond the gate, until even the sound of it had dissolved into the forest. And then there was nothing. No figures. No drama. No past demanding re-entry. Just rain falling on empty asphalt. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the place they had occupied, as if some part of me still expected the universe to change its mind and send them back with a better argument. It didn't. The gate rolled shut with a smooth, mechanical certainty, sealing the boundary I had defended, not with fury, but with terms. Inside the house, everything remained exactly as I had left it. The air still carried sandalwood. The lights were warm. The beaker of oil waited patiently where I had abandoned it. Chemistry, unconcerned with history. I realized I was shaking, not from fear, from release. When you carry responsibility for other people's survival long enough, your muscles forget what it means to set it down. Even when the weight is gone, the body continues to brace for impact. I placed my hands on the counter and let the tremor move through me. It passed slowly, like a storm emptying itself of rain. I had imagined this moment so many times over the years. In some versions, I delivered speeches sharp enough to wound. In others, I collapsed into their arms, forgiveness rewriting everything in soft cinematic light. The reality was quieter. I had enforced a boundary, and no one had died. I turned off the security monitor. The screen went black, reflecting only my own outline, older, steadier, a woman who had learned how to live with being misunderstood. I picked up the beaker and poured the blend into its mold. The liquid settled, smooth and obedient. Creation, not destruction. That was still the work. Outside, the rain began to soften. Clouds shifted, revealing a thin blade of moonlight cutting across the water. The Puget Sound looked endless, dark and calm, a vastness that asked nothing from me except witness. My phone rested where I had left it, still silenced. For a moment, I considered turning it back on, inviting the verdict of the world to rush in. Curious what strangers had decided about me, curious whether the narrative had survived the twist. Then I surprised myself. I didn't need to know. Peace, I had learned, was not something granted by consensus. It was something constructed privately, defended personally, maintained daily. Let them have their version of me. I had mine. Still, there was one thing I needed to confirm. I opened my email and found the message from the property management company waiting at the top of the inbox. Digital lock accessed. Entry successful. They were inside. Dry. Contained. Gone. A complicated mercy. Delivered at a distance. I exhaled, long and slow, and felt the final thread of obligation loosen around my ribs. For 13 years I had been the one who left. The selfish one. The difficult one. The absence people used to explain their own discomfort. But tonight, the definition shifted. I wasn't the one who left. I was the one who built. I had taken pain and converted it into infrastructure. Walls, gates, systems. A life where chaos had to make an appointment, and most days decided not to bother. When the siege came, the walls held. I walked to the windows and pressed my palm lightly against the cool glass. Somewhere out there, a truck was moving through the dark toward an apartment with neutral carpets and a refrigerator that hummed with impersonal welcome. They would unpack. They would argue. They would tell the story in a way that preserved their dignity. That was fine. Stories are how people survive themselves. I thought about the girl I had been at 22, sitting on the bedroom floor with a collections notice in her shaking hands, believing love required surrender. I wished I could reach back through time and sit beside her, tell her what I knew now. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to build something that cannot be invaded by guilt. The rain stopped completely. Silence settled over the water, deep and resonant, not empty but full, like the pause after truth has finally been spoken. For the first time in my life, quiet did not feel like abandonment. It felt like ownership. And standing there in the reflection of my own hard-won sanctuary, I understood something with breathtaking simplicity. I had not lost my family tonight. I had kept myself. Some people will hear this story and call it revenge. But if you listened closely, you know it wasn't. It was about a woman learning the difference between love and access, between compassion and self-betrayal, between helping and handing herself over to be hurt again. For 13 years, I thought distance was what saved me. Tonight, I understood something deeper. It wasn't the miles, it was the boundary. And boundaries are not cruel. They are the architecture of a peaceful life. Maybe you saw yourself somewhere in this story, in the guilt, in the pressure, in the moment where everyone expected you to open the door just because they knocked loudly enough. If you did, I hope you also saw what happened next. You survived. You built. You kept yourself. And that is a victory no one gets to take from you. If stories about strength, healing, and reclaiming your life speak to something quiet but powerful inside you, then you belong here with us. Subscribe to Hanjiwie Yagi, and let's keep finding the courage to close the doors that no longer lead us home. I'll see you in the next story.